Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, today we're going to practice a little bit of shadowing again. I'm going to read an article about crop rotation for you today. I'm going to put spaces in after all of the sentences so you can repeat. Try and copy my intonation and my pronunciation. Okay, I'm going to read fairly fast, so you're going to have to repeat fairly fast. There are two ways you can do this. You can do it with the subtitles on, reading as well as repeating, and you can do it with the subtitles off, just repeating. You can try both ways and see which helps you. Okay? Did you have a good day today? I had a pretty good day. We had a lot of meetings, but they were much better than the usual meetings. I actually enjoyed it. Anyway, let's get down to this. Are you ready? Here we go. How does crop rotation work? By alternating crops to give the soil a rest and to replace nutrients that are removed. People transition from a hunter-gatherer culture to an agricultural culture in about 12,000 BC. First, they domesticated animals. This happened in different places on Earth within a few thousand years. In about 9,500 BC, people started to grow crops such as wheat, barley, peas, lentils, and flax. By 8000 BC, farming was common around the world, which brought a huge change in the way people lived and caused a growth in population. There is evidence that people were rotating crops from about 6000 BC in the ancient Near East. They didn't know why, but they knew from experience that rotating crops allowed them to use the same field for longer. The Egyptians used a system of crop rotation that the Romans may have picked up. The Romans called it food, feed, fallow. Farmers divided their farming land into three parts. In the food part, they would plant grain, such as wheat. In the feed part, they would plant barley or oats that would be used to feed the livestock. And the fallow part would be left empty. In most countries, after the time of the Romans, a two-field system was used. One field would be used to grow crops, while a second field was left empty. This would be reversed the following year. From the Middle Ages onwards in Europe, a three-field system was introduced. This was basically the same as the Roman system. In the early 16th century, a four-field system was invented in what is now Belgium. This system was picked up and introduced to the UK in the early 18th century. It is one of the biggest reasons why the British agricultural revolution was able to happen, which was, in turn, one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution was able to happen. So how does crop rotation work and why is it good? How crop rotation works is very simple. Farmers alternate the crops that they grow on a field. They may alternate them yearly, or they may have a 3 or 4 year cycle that uses different kinds of crops. What benefits does crop rotation have? There are 6 clear advantages of rotating crops. The first 2 are pests and diseases. Insects and other pests tend to have evolved to feed on a particular kind of crop. If you change the type of crop at the end of the year, their food source is removed and they die. They also usually live in the crop, so their habitat is also removed and they die. Crop rotation spares crops from diseases in a similar way. Diseases that blight crops tend to be species specific, and they can live in the soil. If the same crops are planted year after year, the diseases will come back. If different crops are planted, the diseases often die out. The third reason is weed control. If the same crops are planted in a field for consecutive years, or if a field is left fallow, weeds can become a problem. To prevent this, farmers use cover crops in their crop rotation cycle. Cover crops are plants that can stop weeds from growing by outcompeting them for resources. There are many different types of cover crops, but beans and peas would be a good example. They are crops that might not necessarily bring in a big profit for the farmer, but they are invaluable in what they do for the land. When they kill the weeds, those weeds are usually gone for most of the rest of the crop rotation cycle. The fourth reason is erosion. A field that doesn't have crop rotation will lose the consistency in its soil, and it will be very easy for the wind and rain to erode the soil. Cover crops also help to bind the soil and prevent erosion. And the fifth reason is probably the most important. Different crops require different nutrients. Crops such as corn need a lot of nitrogen to grow. Corn uses about 20 kilograms of nitrogen per acre. They take this nitrogen out of the soil and use it. By the end of the season, the nitrogen in the soil is greatly depleted. If the farmer plants corn again the following year, there isn't enough nitrogen and the crop won't be very successful if they grow at all. To fix this, farmers use our friend, the cover crop, again. Cover crops, such as beans, take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil. If a farmer alternates corn and beans, the soil will be replenished on each rotation. In the 1950s, farmers discovered that they didn't have to rotate crops if they used pesticides, fertilizers, and other chemicals. Financially, it is much easier for a farm if they only grow one crop. However, the concern over health and the environment pressured farmers to move back to the rotation system. Some farmers might rotate 2 or 3 crops, and some farmers might have far more complex rotations. So how does crop rotation work? By reducing the damage to the soil and allowing crops to be grown in the same place for longer. Okay, well done. Hang on. Okay, now we're going to do one more thing. I'm going to read the passage, the whole passage without stopping. You can just listen, or you can try and read along. You can use the subtitles, or you can find the link to the passage down below here. All of these passages come from a website I have called ilearnthistoday.com. You can have a look at that if you want. So listen or try and read along with me. Are you ready? Here we go. How does crop rotation work? By alternating crops to give the soil a rest and to replace nutrients that are removed. People transitioned from a hunter-gatherer culture to an agricultural culture in about 12,000 BC. First, they domesticated animals. This happened in different places on Earth within a few thousand years. In about 9,500 BC, people started to grow crops such as wheat, barley, peas, lentils, and flax. By 8,000 BC, farming was common around the world, which brought a huge change in the way people lived and caused a growth in population. There is evidence that people were rotating crops from about 6000 BC in the ancient Near East. They didn't know why, but they knew from experience that rotating crops allowed them to use the same field for longer. The Egyptians used a system of crop rotation that the Romans may have picked up. The Romans called it food, feed, fallow. Farmers divided their farming land into 3 parts. In the food part, they would plant grain, such as wheat. In the feed part, they would plant barley or oats that would be used to feed the livestock, and the fallow part would be left empty. In most countries, after the time of the Romans, a 2-field system was used. One field would be used to grow crops, while a second field was left empty. This would be reversed the following year. From the Middle Ages onwards in Europe, a 3-field system was introduced. This was basically the same as the Roman system. In the early 16th century, a 4-field system was invented in what is now Belgium. This system was picked up and introduced to the UK in the early 18th century. It is one of the biggest reasons why the British agricultural revolution was able to happen, which was, in turn, one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution was able to happen. So how does crop rotation work, and why is it good? How crop rotation works is very simple. Farmers alternate the crops that they grow on a field. They may alternate them yearly, or they may have a 3 or 4 year cycle that uses different kinds of crops. What benefits does crop rotation have? There are 6 clear advantages of rotating crops. The first 2 are pests and diseases. Insects and other pests tend to have evolved to feed on a particular kind of crop. If you change the type of crop at the end of the year, their food source is removed and they die. They also usually live in the crop, so their habitat is also removed and they die. Crop rotation spares crops from diseases in a similar way. Diseases that blight crops tend to be species-specific, and they can live in the soil. If the same crops are planted year after year, the diseases will come back. If different crops are planted, the diseases often die out. The third reason is weed control. If the same crops are planted in a field for consecutive years, or if a field is left fallow, weeds can become a problem. To prevent this, farmers use cover crops in their crop rotation cycle. Cover crops are plants that can stop weeds from growing by outcompeting them for resources. There are many different types of cover crops, but beans and peas would be a good example. They are crops that might not necessarily bring in a big profit for the farmer, but they are invaluable in what they do for the land. When they kill the weeds, those weeds are usually gone for most of the rest of the crop rotation cycle. The fourth reason is erosion. A field that doesn't have crop rotation will lose the consistency in its soil, and it will be very easy for the wind and rain to erode the soil. Cover crops also help to bind the soil and prevent erosion. And the fifth reason is probably the most important. Different crops require different nutrients. Crops, such as corn, need a lot of nitrogen to grow. Corn uses about 20 kilograms of nitrogen per acre. They take this nitrogen out of the soil and use it. By the end of the season, the nitrogen in the soil is greatly depleted. If the farmer plants corn again the following year, there isn't enough nitrogen and the crop won't be very successful, if they grow at all. To fix this, farmers use our friend the cover crop again. Cover crops, such as beans, take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil. If a farmer alternates corn and beans, the soil will be replenished on each rotation. In the 1950s, farmers discovered that they didn't have to rotate crops if they used pesticides, fertilizers, and other chemicals. Financially, it is much easier for a farm if they only grow one crop. However, the concern over health and the environment pressured farmers to move back to the rotation system. Some farmers might rotate 2 or 3 crops, and some farmers might have far more complex rotations. So, how does crop rotation work? by reducing the damage to the soil and allowing crops to be grown in the same place for longer. Let me have a quick drink of my coffee. Okay, thank you. So that was shadowing, 2 different ways. You can also listen to it. Click the link below. You can go and read this on the site itself. If you liked this, please subscribe and hit the like button. And I'll be doing another one next week. Until then, have a great week. Goodbye.